On the first day of school, the 7-year-old girl mocked Bonnie for teaching math that was too simple. Seeing that she was so arrogant, Bonnie prepared to test her with more difficult questions. What is 15 plus 17? The little girl answered 32. Bonnie asked Mary several two-digit addition and subtraction questions in a row, but these were extremely easy for Mary. Even if the difficulty of the questions continued to increase, Mary was still able to respond quickly and answer them fluently. What if it was 57 plus 135? The little girl answered 192 with a little impatience. In order to stump the arrogant little girl in front of her, Bonnie directly asked a multiplication question that she didn't know the answer to. So what about 57 times 135? Mary frowned slightly after hearing this. Obviously, this question exceeded her expectations. However, just when Bonnie thought she had finally stumped her, the little girl quickly gave the answer, 7695. This answer shocked Bonnie. Bonnie picked up the calculator to check with an incredible look on her face, and the answer was completely correct. What's even more embarrassing is that Mary also calculated its square root. Originally, first-grade students were learning single-digit addition, but Mary was able to calculate the square root. Faced with this situation, the teacher didn't know how to continue teaching. Not long after, the principal came to the classroom. The principal originally planned to greet the students in the class at the beginning of the school year, but Mary raised her hand to speak directly. Mary pointed at the principal and asked him to notify Frank to pick her up immediately. This school is really boring, and Frank came to the school not long after. Bonnie mistakenly thought that Frank was Mary's father, so she chased him out and said that your child is a genius. He can calculate 3-digit multiplication at the age of 7. Upon hearing this, Frank immediately said that this is a great fast calculation system of the Trachtenberg algorithm. Frank mastered it when he was 8 years old, so there is nothing strange about it. This remark made Bonnie at a loss for how to respond, thinking that this is a very extraordinary family. Bonnie went online to check after returning to the office. Unexpectedly, the algorithm Frank mentioned really existed, but it is not easy to master. It seems that Frank must be hiding something. In fact, Frank is not Mary's father, but his uncle. Mary's mother was accidentally pregnant that year, and her father disappeared before the child was born. Her mother is a genius mathematician who has been studying the Navier-Stokes equation, one of the problems of the Millennium Prize. In the end, for some reason, her mother committed suicide. From then on, Frank, as a younger brother, began to take care of Mary. In fact, he knew that Mary was a mathematical genius girl, but Frank did not want Mary to live in high-pressure mathematical calculations every day like her sister. Although there is no clear evidence that her sister chose to commit suicide because of the pressure of calculation, it must be related to this, so Frank let Mary go to an ordinary school. Frank wanted Mary to have a happy childhood, and when he got on the car, he repeatedly emphasized to her that she must be low-key at school. Unexpectedly, such a thing happened on the first day. Frank could only patiently warn Mary that she should not contradict Bonnie just because she knew more than others, and should get along well with classmates and make more friends. Under Frank's patient persuasion and teaching, Mary really restrained herself a lot in the class on the second day. Mary not only introduced herself like other classmates, but also introduced the one-eyed orange cat she picked up from the trash can to everyone. This cat is very smart and loving, but no one noticed this and no one really understood it. Bonnie felt happy and relieved after hearing this, and wanted to verify her guess more and more. So when Mary quickly finished the math test in class, she did not show surprise this time. Instead, Bonnie took out another high school function test paper that she had prepared long ago. When Mary finished it first again, the two smiled at each other, and Mary finally felt understood. And Bonnie was more certain that Mary was a math genius, so after school, Bonnie began to search for Mary's full name on the internet. Only then did he learn that Mary's mother was a genius mathematician, and he saw everything about her mother, and Frank, who raised Mary alone, was no ordinary person. He was originally an assistant professor in the Department of Philosophy at Boston University, but for some reason, he is now willing to work as a repairman at a dock. Out of concern for Mary, Bonnie found Frank in a bar in town. She didn't understand why Frank put his child in an ordinary school. Frank told Bonnie that Mary had lived with him for 6.5 years. Frank hoped that Mary would be an ordinary child. Sometimes being ordinary can bring more happiness. Under Frank's influence, Mary not only had happiness, but also developed a strong sense of justice. That day, a boy in the same class carefully carried his handicraft onto the school bus, but was deliberately tripped by a senior bully. His carefully made handicraft was instantly shattered. When she saw the bully, who was still very arrogant afterwards, Mary taught him a lesson on the spot. Frank was called to the school for the second time. Seeing the bully with blood all over his face, Frank knew that Mary had made a big mistake this time. But the principal, who knew that Mary was a genius, did not criticize or blame her. Instead, he suggested that Frank transfer Mary to a genius school. The principal could even apply for a full scholarship for them, but faced with this opportunity that ordinary families dream of, Frank chose to decisively refuse because he believed that going to a genius school would only strengthen Mary's uniqueness. This was extremely detrimental to Mary's growth. As for Mary's beating up her classmates, he said that beating people was indeed wrong, but Frank was even more proud of Mary's standing up. After saying that, Frank took Mary away without looking back. The next day, under Bonnie's patient guidance, Mary finally apologized publicly in class and took the initiative to admit her mistakes. But these were all words she was forced to say against her will. What she really wanted to say was that the work that was destroyed was the best one in the class, and she even led the applause after saying that. After hearing this, the frustrated little boy finally smiled. After school, Frank picked up Mary as usual, but when he got home, he found a woman waiting at their door, and this woman was Mary's grandmother, Evelyn. It turned out that after the principal failed to communicate with Frank that day, he contacted Evelyn through the information. After learning that Mary had a very high talent for mathematics, Evelyn came to find her without stopping. In order to please Mary, she also bought a brand new computer and downloaded all the course materials for advanced mathematics in it. When she heard that Mary had finished learning and started studying calculus, her eyes instantly became more greedy, but when she wanted to continue discussing mathematics with Mary, Frank politely drove her out. However, Evelyn was very strong and domineering, and directly confessed that the purpose of this visit was to take Mary away. Because Evelyn felt that only she could provide Mary with the best educational resources and learning environment, and only she could train Mary to become the world's leading mathematician. When she mentioned her deceased daughter, she not only did not feel the slightest guilt, but also accused her of being too weak and failing to achieve success and go down in history. Although Frank already knew what his mother was like, he was still very disappointed after hearing this. In order to prevent Mary from losing her childhood, in order to prevent Mary from repeating her mother's mistakes, and in order to prevent Mary from staying in a closed research institution for the rest of her life, the older scholars discussed academic issues. Frank firmly disagreed to hand over custody, and because they could not reach a consensus, the two decided to meet in court. Frank was not interested in work after returning home. He knew very well that he would have a hard time winning against Evelyn in terms of connections and money. Depressed, Frank took Mary out to relax. He actually persisted for so long. Frank didn't know if his decision was right. Perhaps with Mary's talent, she could solve the ultimate problem that plagued mankind. But even if he was a genius among geniuses, he would face and endure unimaginable pressure to achieve such an achievement. Soon after, the trial officially began. Evelyn's gold medal lawyer directly pointed out that Frank did not have the financial ability to provide a good environment for Mary. Not only that, he also falsely accused Frank of occupying Mary's custody without authorization. Frank's lawyer said that adopting Mary was his sister's last wish, and the child's living environment could not be used as a criterion for judgment. If the standard for adoption is based on economic conditions rather than a will, then the rich can grab children at will. The defendant's lawyer's strong and powerful counterattack made the judge feel that it made sense. Therefore, the first instance judgment reserved Frank's right to custody Mary. Although Frank had the upper hand, the court also granted Evelyn's visitation rights and sent a third party to observe Mary's actual living conditions. However, before the verdict came down, life would remain the same, so Frank handed Mary to the care of the neighbor's elder sister as usual on Friday night. And Frank came to the bar alone again, because facing a strong and wealthy mother. He was not sure whether he could win the lawsuit in the end. But just when he was depressed and unhappy, Bonnie came over again. It turned out that she had heard about Evelyn's fight for custody, so she came to explain that she did not betray them. After the misunderstanding was resolved, she talked to Frank about Mary's education. Unexpectedly, the two people's views were surprisingly consistent, which made them happier and more speculative as they talked. In the end, the two chatted all the way from the bar to Frank's home. Bonnie was afraid that it would be embarrassing to run into Mary, and Frank told her not to worry, because Mary would not be home until noon the next day. However, the next morning, Mary suddenly realized that she had not taken the CD she wanted to watch, so she hurried back home with the key. Just as Mary was looking around, she happened to run into Bonnie coming out of the bathroom. Seeing Mary's expression of instant understanding, Bonnie was embarrassed and had to change her clothes and take a taxi to leave. Frank, who had sent Bonnie away, couldn't help but get angry with Mary. Because they had set a rule before, Mary had to stay at the neighbor's eldest sister's house on Friday night and Saturday morning. Only in this way could Frank have a little private life. Seeing the angry Frank, Mary ran back to the room with grievance. After realizing his impulse, Frank came to apologize to Mary, who was huddled in a corner. Mary forgave Frank on the surface, but she also knew that her existence was a trouble for Frank. This closed heart was buried deeper. Not long after, Frank received a court judgment, which also meant that Mary had to live with Evelyn for 2 days. Evelyn brought Mary back to Boston soon, where she saw the prosperity of tall buildings for the first time. She saw her mother's face for the first time, and had the opportunity to touch the piano score for the first time. But her grandmother did not give her time to play and perform. Instead, she hurriedly took her to MIT and introduced her to the 7 world problems in mathematics. Countless scholars have been striving for their whole lives, and as long as they can solve one of them, they can win the highest honor, the Fields Medal. One of the 7 problems, the Navier-Stokes equation, is the research direction of Mary's mother. Mary looked at the empty frame above the title. Grandma said disappointedly that your mother could have left her name in history, but she cowardly chose to give up. At this time, Mary suddenly said that maybe in the future, my photo could be hung there. Evelyn was even more excited when she heard this, and immediately said that she would do her best to help you, in order to test Mary's talent and her self-study achievements from childhood to adulthood. Grandma specially asked a mathematics professor from MIT to come up with a difficult problem of normal distribution function. However, half an hour passed without any movement. The professor immediately looked at Evelyn with disappointment, indicating that Mary had no talent for mathematics. Evelyn had no choice but to pull Mary away from the scene while angrily complaining about what a bad professor, who came up with such a difficult problem right away. Unexpectedly, Mary said that there was no need to solve this problem at all, because the problem itself was wrong. After hearing this, Grandma immediately took Mary back to the classroom. This time, Mary not only quickly corrected the mistakes in the question, but also calculated the correct answer like flowing water. The professor stared at the blackboard for a long time, but what made him more curious was that since Mary had known that there was a problem with the question, why didn't she point it out at the beginning? Mary said that her uncle had taught her that it was impolite to point out the mistakes of elders in person. The professor could only smile awkwardly after hearing this. It seems that Mary is not only polite, but also a rare mathematical genius in a century. 2 days passed in a flash, and Evelyn sent Mary back as promised. Mary told Frank that I like Evelyn very much because she looks like my mother. Not only that, she also has the piano I have always wanted, but I don't want to live with her because she is very bossy. Frank comforted her and told her not to worry, and promised her that she would not be taken away by anyone. The reason why Mary was afraid was that she would face inquiries from a third party next. This was related to who she would live with in the end, but with Frank's guarantee, she was no longer worried. Facing the inquiries, Mary also answered all the questions truthfully. When the second trial came, Evelyn found Mary's father from nowhere and used money to make him designate herself as Mary's guardian. Fortunately, Frank's lawyer had already prepared countermeasures. He said that the man had never seen or even looked for Mary since she was born. The man argued that he had looked for her, but just couldn't find her. Hearing this, the lawyer immediately handed over the computer. As such a well-known mathematician, all his information can be found by simply searching on the internet. The man's lie was thus self-defeating, and Frank once again gained the upper hand. But when Frank returned home, he found Mary crying. It turned out that Mary heard the news of her father's attendance. She didn't understand why her father was in the same city as her, but he refused to come to see her for 7 years. This also made her feel abandoned for the first time. In order to comfort the heartbroken Mary, Frank took her to the obstetrics and gynecology department of the hospital and sat outside the delivery room waiting together. At first, Mary didn't understand why Frank did this, until someone excitedly ran out to tell the family that the child had been born safely. Looking at the strangers hugging each other because of joy, Frank told Mary that when she was born, we were as happy as they were. So Mary, like every child, is always loved by someone. Mary finally smiled after hearing this, and even excitedly ran over to cheer with the strangers and celebrate the arrival of a new life. Soon after, the third trial began. Evelyn gave a self-report as a grandmother. She believed that genius is the most scarce resource on earth. Since God has given them the best genes, they should shoulder this responsibility to overcome the problems that plague mankind. Ordinary people have ordinary people's troubles and are not worry-free all their lives, and extraordinary people naturally encounter extraordinary problems and pressures. Besides, Mary herself likes mathematics, and she has an interest in resisting pressure and continuing to explore. No one can guarantee that Mary will regret the ordinary happiness of her childhood when she grows up. Although Evelyn's words were somewhat strong and arrogant, the people present had nothing to refute. Then Frank also gave a self-narration, recalling Mary's carefree state. He couldn't imagine whether Mary could still have such an innocent smile when everything around her became a formula. As a former assistant professor of philosophy at Boston University, Frank couldn't say that he had seen through life, but at least he understood the colorfulness of life. Whether Mary was a genius or a mediocre person, she should have the right to experience and choose independently. If Mary wanted to learn mathematics, Frank would not interfere and would not stop her from going out to play. This is the difference between Frank and Evelyn. Evelyn wanted Mary to gamble everything, while Frank wanted Mary to let nature take its course. Since neither side was willing to give in, neither side was sure of winning. That night, the lawyer found Frank because Evelyn had a stronger economic and social background, which was not good for Frank. So he proposed a compromise plan, which was to send Mary to a foster family first. Until she is 12 years old and can decide who to live with, Frank can visit Mary at any time. Frank didn't want to accept this plan, but considering the consequences of losing the case, he might not even have the chance to see Mary. In the end, Frank had no choice but to compromise. The foster family was one that Frank personally inspected. It was only a 25-minute drive from where he lives now. The conditions of this family are very good, and the couple seem very kind. Not only that, there is also the piano that Mary has been thinking about. There is no doubt that such an environment is more conducive to Mary's growth. But when she brought Mary and the one-eyed cat together, Mary burst into tears because she felt that she was abandoned again. Faced with Mary's tearful plea, Frank was also struggling and painful in his heart. But as an adult, he had too many concerns and was helpless. Even if he was reluctant, he had to leave cruelly. Although Mary no longer disturbed the family, the quiet life did not make Frank happy. The days without Mary made Frank at a loss, and he could only numb his nerves by working non-stop. But even so, it still didn't help, because he knew very well that what he did was unforgivable abandonment and betrayal. Soon after, Frank came to the foster family to visit Mary with carefully prepared gifts. Unexpectedly, he was rejected by Mary's adoptive father because his appearance would cause Mary to be emotionally unstable, and if he was allowed in, all the efforts of the adoptive parents before might be in vain. In the end, Frank could only leave the gift helplessly and decided not to disturb Mary's normal life from then on. Until one day, a few months later, Bonnie saw a notice on the wall that Mary's one-eyed orange cat was about to be euthanized, so she quickly took a photo and sent it to Frank. After seeing it, Frank immediately put down his work and drove to the shelter on the notice, and rescued the one-eyed orange cat in time. The staff said that the cat was sent by a man. He also said that the family had to resort to this measure because they were allergic to cat hair. But Frank knew very well that no one in the foster family was allergic to cat hair. The only one who was allergic to cat hair was Evelyn. Frank, who suddenly realized it, hurriedly took the cat away. Then he took a box that had been sealed for 6 years from home, and then came to the foster family angrily. The moment he opened the door, he saw Mary was surrounded by a group of mathematics professors. Frank took out a thick stack of documents from the box, threw it on the table, and prepared to take Mary away. But facing Frank's sudden visit, Mary ran out with an angry face, and Frank immediately chased after her, and then let Mary vent her emotions on him. She cried and asked Frank why he broke his promise and why he left her alone in a strange place. This time, no matter what Mary said or did, Frank held her tightly in his arms and did not let go, and kept apologizing to her over and over again. This time, he would never let Mary leave his side again. After a frank conversation between the two, Mary held up Frank's smile with her tender little hands. In the end, the little love between them melted in their smiles. After getting Mary's forgiveness, Frank found his mother again. It turned out that the information he brought was the answer to the problem. His mother didn't believe that her daughter had already solved the equation. Since it was solved, why didn't he publish it? Seeing his mother's emotions so out of control, Frank had an inexplicable sense of sadness. It turned out that his sister had told him that the work could only be published after death, but Evelyn said that she had been dead for 6 years. However, Frank told Evelyn that it was not after his sister's death. After hearing this, Evelyn realized that the so-called after death was after her own death. Now Frank had violated his sister's wishes and gave Evelyn the answer to the problem. Frank had no other purpose, but just hoped that he would let Mary go. After saying this, Frank left the room, packed up his things, and prepared to go home with Mary. Evelyn, who was left alone, was originally going to call MIT. But while waiting for the call to be answered, she saw the manuscript left by her daughter. The stains on it were all tears that flowed one by one, and Evelyn didn't understand it until this moment. The daughter likes mathematics, but she has never felt happy in the process of writing equations. On the contrary, she felt more pain. Seeing this, she gradually collapsed and burst into tears. But it seemed to last only for a moment. After the call was connected to the university professor, Evelyn returned to her cold and ruthless appearance. From then on, Mary finally got rid of her grandmother and continued to live with Frank. He would send Mary to college classes and pick her up whenever she didn't want to study. She made friends with classmates in ordinary schools by playing games and became an innocent little girl. Genius is directed by Marc Webb, starring Chris Evans and McKenna Grace. A family movie released in 2017. Mary is a genius girl with great talent in mathematics, but in order not to let her live in the shackles of everyone's expectations, Uncle Frank decided to let her hide her talent and try to learn to be an ordinary person, enjoying the childhood and happiness that ordinary children should have. But Grandma Evelyn insisted on magnifying her talent. Let Mary receive devil training from an early age to achieve extraordinary achievements that have attracted worldwide attention. But no matter which educational method is used, it seems to be heading towards an extreme. Fortunately, after many confrontations between the two, they have found a better way of education. That is, to give full play to Mary's talent potential, we must protect her children and innocence. Well, today's movie sharing ends here. Welcome to like, comment, and forward. Thank you for your patience in watching. Looking forward to meeting you next time.